Fewer than 2% of reports of so-called cryptid sightings in North America are ever investigated by anyone with formal field training in ecology, law enforcement, or land management. This is the life story of a person who moved from the doctrine of conservation to the margins of folklore, from the structured patrol grids of public land to the unregulated frontier of cryptid hunting, and in doing so, revealed the architecture of both worlds. The birth of this person as a park ranger began with a problem of scale. By the early 21st century, the acreage of protected land in the United States alone exceeded 85 million acres under the administration of the National Park Service, with additional millions under the Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management. The gap between land and supervision was measurable and persistent. A lesser-known supply constraint of public land management is staffing density. In some large Western parks, there are fewer than one commissioned ranger per 30,000 acres during off-peak seasons. The parents of this career were policy and idealism. The doctrine of conservation, shaped by legislation such as the Organic Act of 1916, mandated preservation unimpaired for future generations. Industry provided the logistics, uniforms, radios, standardized vehicles, incident command systems. A lesser-known design compromise of ranger equipment is the balance between visibility and neutrality. Uniforms must signal authority while blending into natural terrain, leading to specific color palettes tested for both psychological deterrence and low wildlife disturbance. Early prototypes of this person were visible in volunteer trail crews and seasonal interpretive programs. Training included law enforcement certification in many jurisdictions, emergency medical response, wildfire behavior, and search and rescue techniques. A lesser-known crew training detail is that federally commissioned rangers may complete over 600 hours of combined academy and field instruction, including defensive tactics and firearms qualification, even in parks where violent crime is statistically rare. Childhood in this life meant probationary years. Patrol routes were assigned. Reports were written with cautious precision. The terrain taught lessons faster than supervisors could. A lesser-known weather impact on ranger operations is lightning density. In parts of the Rocky Mountains, lightning strikes exceed 15 per square mile annually, influencing both wildfire ignition rates and patrol risk calculations. Early misunderstandings were common. Visitors equated ranger presence with hospitality staff rather than law enforcement authority. Others assumed wilderness was benign. A lesser-known medical effect encountered by rangers is altitude sickness among unacclimated hikers. In parks above 8,000 feet, mild acute mountain sickness can affect up to 25% of visitors, often requiring ranger intervention. Small changes mattered. The adjustment of patrol timing to coincide with peak visitor influx reduced incident response times by measurable margins. The refinement of radio protocol minimized confusion during multi-agency operations. A lesser-known test result from search and rescue analysis shows that response within the first 6 hours of a missing person report increases survival probability significantly, particularly in cold environments. Growth came with standardization. Incident command system doctrine structured responses to wildfires, floods, and lost hikers. Equipment lists were formalized. Vehicles were rotated on maintenance schedules. A lesser-known production issue in public safety fleets is deferred maintenance due to budget cycles. Aging vehicles in some districts exceed recommended service life by several years, increasing mechanical failure rates in remote terrain. The system matured around data. Visitor counts were logged, wildlife interactions were mapped, seasonal trends informed staffing models. A lesser-known command doctrine shift in park management over the last 2 decades has been the integration of predictive analytics to anticipate crowd surges and allocate rangers accordingly, a move from reactive to proactive deployment. At peak effectiveness, the ranger role is quiet and preventative. A lost child reunited within 30 minutes. A wildfire contained at a quarter acre. A backcountry permit system preventing overcrowding of fragile alpine zones. A lesser-known battlefield improvisation in wilderness response is the use of improvised litters constructed from trekking poles and jackets when standard rescue stretchers cannot reach steep terrain. The defining scenario for this person occurred not in a firefight, but during a multi-day search in dense forest after reports of strange howls and a missing camper converged. Officially, it was categorized as a search and rescue operation. Unofficially, it marked the beginning of doubt. A lesser-known psychological effect of prolonged search missions is cognitive priming. When teams operate under ambiguous threat, perception of unusual stimuli increases measurably, particularly during night operations. He found no creature beyond known species. The missing camper was located dehydrated but alive, disoriented by hypothermia. Yet the narrative among locals persisted. Something else was in those woods. A lesser-known countermeasure used by park authorities in response to cryptid rumors is transparent data release, publishing wildlife population statistics and incident reports to reduce speculation through evidence. The cost of ranger life accumulated physically. Seasonal wildfire assignments exposed him to smoke particulates. Studies indicate that wildfire smoke can elevate short-term respiratory symptoms among responders, even with protective measures. A lesser-known medical effect of repeated smoke exposure is increased risk of chronic bronchitis over extended careers, particularly without consistent respirator use. Fatigue became normalized. Shifts extended beyond 12 hours during peak season. The math of overtime versus staffing shortages rarely favored rest. A lesser-known supply constraint in public land agencies is recruitment retention. Some regions report vacancy rates exceeding 15%, increasing workload on remaining personnel. Old age of the ranger identity arrived not through failure, but through disillusionment. Budget debates in legislative chambers translated into equipment delays on the ground. Visitor behavior shifted with social media, drawing crowds to fragile sites unprepared for volume. A lesser-known design compromise in modern park management is the tension between accessibility and preservation, requiring infrastructure that can both invite and limit human impact. Replacement did not mean retirement from fieldwork. Instead, it meant migration into a parallel world. The persona of cryptid hunter emerged gradually, shaped by online communities, independent expeditions, and monetization of mystery. A lesser-known production issue in amateur investigative media is verification. Absence of standardized evidence protocols often leads to amplification of anecdote over data. Growth in this second life relied on portable technology, thermal cameras, trail cameras, audio recorders, drones. Equipment once restricted to research institutions became commercially available. A lesser-known test result from wildlife biology indicates that misidentification rates of common species in low-light camera footage can exceed 30% among untrained observers. Standardization here was informal. Online forums shared field guides of rumored creatures, checklists of gear circulated. A lesser-known crew training detail among experienced field researchers is calibration of equipment before deployment. Many amateur cryptid investigations neglect calibration of thermal sensitivity or audio gain, leading to false positives. At peak visibility, the cryptid hunter persona thrives on ambiguity. Night expeditions filmed for streaming audiences, maps marked with red circles, testimonials from locals. A lesser-known psychological effect of group expectation is confirmation bias. When teams enter a forest anticipating unusual sounds, ambiguous sounds are more likely to be interpreted as extraordinary. The defining battlefield in this phase was a heavily wooded tract adjacent to protected land, where livestock deaths had sparked rumor.
Official wildlife assessments attributed most such incidents nationally to known predators, coyotes, bears, mountain lions, with misattribution rates historically significant in rural folklore. A lesser-known countermeasure in livestock protection is the use of guard animals. Properly trained livestock guardian dogs can reduce predation losses by measurable percentages. He documented tracks, recorded audio, interviewed residents. No verified biological specimen emerged, yet the narrative sustained audience interest. A lesser-known weather impact on field recordings is temperature inversion layers at night, which can carry distant animal calls over greater distances and distort perception of source location. The cost of this second career was different. Credibility among former colleagues eroded. Invitations to professional conferences ceased. A lesser-known command doctrine.
In 2022, the United States recorded more than 318 million recreational visits to National Park Service sites, a volume that places extraordinary pressure on fewer than 20,000 permanent and seasonal employees combined. That imbalance is where the second half of his life truly began to take shape, not in a single resignation letter, but in the widening space between what the doctrine of conservation promised and what the ground reality delivered. The Ranger years did not end abruptly, they eroded. Patrol reports grew longer as visitor incidents increased. Illegal drone flights, off-trail hiking, unauthorized camping in fragile zones. A lesser-known design compromise in protected land management is the construction of hardened trails. Widening a path by even 12 inches can reduce off-trail erosion by measurable percentages, yet it simultaneously signals accessibility that attracts higher traffic. He had entered the service believing that preservation was a matter of law and education. He discovered it was also a matter of crowd psychology. On holiday weekends, trailhead parking lots overflowed before sunrise. A lesser-known test result from visitor behavior studies shows that visible rule breaking, such as one group crossing a barrier, increases the probability of imitation by up to 40% in high-density recreational settings. The childhood of his cryptid interest had always been there, dormant and unofficial, late-night readings of folklore, campfire stories exchanged during seasonal assignments, reports filed by visitors who insisted they had seen something not on the species list. A lesser-known psychological effect in wilderness environments is pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in ambiguous stimuli, particularly faces and figures in low light. At first, he treated such reports with procedural neutrality: document, reassure, cross-reference with known wildlife presence. In many parks, black bear populations are estimated through mark recapture methods and DNA hair snares, yielding population models with margins of error that can exceed 15% depending on terrain complexity. A lesser-known production issue in wildlife estimation is undercounting in dense canopy zones where camera trap visibility is limited. Growth of the cryptid hunter identity accelerated only after departure from federal service. The resignation was framed as pursuit of independent research, though colleagues interpreted it differently. Without the constraints of official reporting formats, he began publishing field logs online. A lesser-known supply constraint in independent fieldwork is funding of travel. Fuel, equipment maintenance, and access permits can exceed several $1,000s annually without institutional subsidy. Standardization followed visibility. He built checklists for expeditions, GPS calibration, battery redundancy, satellite communication device with emergency beacon. The safety culture of ranger life did not disappear. A lesser-known crew training detail in wilderness operations is the 2 is 1, 1 is none redundancy principle, carrying at least 2 methods of navigation and 2 sources of fire starting capability to mitigate failure. At peak engagement, his channel documented multi-night investigations in regions known for persistent folklore,
Appalachian forests, Pacific Northwest backcountry, desert basins where sound carries unpredictably. Estimates vary on annual reports of Bigfoot sightings in North America, but compiled databases list thousands over decades, though none verified by biological specimen. A lesser-known weather and terrain impact is the acoustic shadow effect in mountainous regions, where ridgelines can distort and reflect animal calls, altering perceived distance and origin. The defining battlefield scenario of this phase involved a cluster of livestock mutilation reports in a rural county. Official veterinary assessments nationwide have consistently attributed most such cases to scavenger activity combined with natural decomposition processes. A lesser-known medical/forensic detail is that post-mortem bloating can cause skin ruptures that appear surgically precise due to differential tissue tension. He approached the site with thermal imaging equipment rated for detection ranges up to 300 meters. Night temperatures dropped below 5 degrees Celsius, reducing battery efficiency by measurable margins. A lesser-known design compromise in consumer-grade thermal cameras is resolution versus portability. Lighter units often sacrifice pixel density, increasing risk of misidentifying small mammals as larger forms at distance. No cryptid was documented. What was captured were coyotes, feral dogs, and once a black bear crossing at 2:17 a.m. Yet the ambiguity of shadows sustained narrative tension. A lesser-known countermeasure used by wildlife biologists to address livestock predation is installation of motion-activated deterrent lights, which in controlled trials have reduced nighttime predator approaches by significant percentages, though habituation can occur over time. The cost of operating in ambiguity intensified, sleep cycles inverted, field nights replaced daylight routine. Chronic sleep disruption is associated with increased irritability and impaired judgment, even in otherwise healthy adults. A lesser-known medical effect of irregular circadian rhythm is elevated risk of mood disorders over prolonged periods. Financial pressure mounted alongside reputational strain. Former colleagues in federal service viewed his new role with skepticism. Invitations to collaborative research were rare. A lesser-known command doctrine shift in many scientific agencies over the last decade has been stricter separation between peer-reviewed research and entertainment-driven investigation, limiting cross-participation. Old age of the cryptid hunter identity began with repetition. Each expedition mirrored the last: equipment setup, interviews, nocturnal surveillance, inconclusive results. Audience engagement plateaued. Platform analytics showed diminishing returns despite increased production effort. A lesser-known production issue in digital content ecosystems is algorithm fatigue. Repeated thematic content without novel evidence can trigger reduced distribution within recommendation systems. Technological counters improved. Trail cameras with higher resolution and AI-assisted species recognition reduced misidentification rates. Environmental DNA sampling, capable of detecting trace genetic material in soil and water, expanded species confirmation capacity. A lesser-known test result in environmental DNA research demonstrates detection sensitivity down to minute quantities, but also highlights contamination risk if field protocols are lax. He faced a decision familiar to many professions: double down on narrative or recalibrate towards evidence. The Ranger doctrine of documentation resurfaced. He began incorporating educational segments into wildlife ecology into his investigations. A lesser-known battlefield improvisation in public science communication is embedding correction within story, presenting folklore alongside verified data to maintain audience while increasing accuracy. Legacy formed not through proof of a creature, but through synthesis of two cultures. He demonstrated that skepticism and curiosity need not be enemies. Some followers shifted from belief in specific monsters to interest in biodiversity and conservation. A lesser-known psychological effect of reframing is reduction of cognitive dissonance. When individuals are offered evidence without ridicule, openness to revision increases measurably. Militaries speak of after-action review. Conservation agencies speak of adaptive management. In both, lessons are extracted from failure without denial of reality. His life bridged institutional rigor and cultural myth. A lesser-known command doctrine shift in wildlife agencies has been proactive engagement with rumor, recognizing that ignoring folklore can allow mistrust to fester. The terrain never changed. Forest canopies still filtered light in fragmented beams, wind still produced tones in hollow trunks. The difference lay in interpretation. As ranger, unexplained sound triggered search protocol. As cryptid hunter, it triggered recording device activation. A lesser-known weather impact in dense woodland is microclimate variation. Temperature differentials of several degrees within short distances can alter animal movement patterns and sound propagation. In old age of this dual identity, he speaks less of monsters and more of process. He acknowledges absence of verified evidence while preserving respect for witness testimony. Estimates vary on unexplained wildlife encounters globally, but absence of specimen remains decisive in biological classification. A lesser-known supply constraint in formal species recognition is requirement of type specimen for taxonomic validation, a standard rarely understood outside academic circles. Legacy is measured in integration. Younger